Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm very excited to be here with you all as we kick off our second day of programming here at the NSF workshop on quantum engineering education. Now, before I hand off the reins, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is AJ Sultan. I'm a member of the OSA management staff, and I will also be your room monitor today. That means that I'm here as a resource if you're having any technical issues or if you need assistance of any kind. Please feel free to reach out to me directly using the chat function in your toolbar at the bottom of your screen at any time during the session, and I'll be here to assist you. Now, if any attendees have any questions for the speakers, please feel free to make sure to put those in the Q&A box. Please enter your questions as they come up. There's no need to wait until the end. And if you see any questions that you like, please hit that thumbs up button, the thumbs up icon next to that question, and that'll let our speakers know that this is a popular question and that the attendees want to see it answered. Just as a reminder, this webinar room is going to close at the end of the session. Please make sure to use the Zoom links on the Schedules tab of the NSF workshop page to join our next session. There's a different link for that one. And finally, NSF will be sending out a survey to all of you in a few days, and we would truly value and appreciate any feedback that you can provide there on our meeting. And that's all I've got. It's time to get the show on the road. Without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our session chair and panel moderator today, Theresa Lynn from Harvey Mudd College. Theresa, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, AJ. We have a really interesting panel for you this morning or this afternoon, whichever it is for you. Today, we're going to be able to reflect on lessons learned from a number of different efforts in quantum outreach, from some studies of the role of undergraduate education in preparing a quantum workforce, and also from experience of developing interdisciplinary engineering programs. So I want to get right out of the way to let us start with our speakers. But as we did yesterday, I'll just remind everybody that we'll do questions at the end of all of the speakers, but certainly do post your questions as we go along and let other people react to them. And our Google Doc from yesterday remains open to continue exchanging ideas in that venue. Thank you, Elise. Terrific. I'll move right along now and introduce our keynote speaker for this session. We're delighted to have Emily Edwards from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's managing director of the Illinois Quantum Information Science and Technology Center and was previously the director of communications and outreach at the Joint Quantum Institute at the University of Maryland. We've talked a little bit about the QIS key concepts yesterday in this meeting, and Emily co-led the development of that set of concepts. She also co-leads the Q to Work program within the National Q through 12 Educational Partnership. So over to Emily.
Okay, I'll just I think that's sharing. Thank you so much, Theresa, and thank you to the organizers for putting this workshop together. I'm excited to be here, actually wearing my science outreach hat rather than so much management, and to talk about education opportunities, the Q to Work program, and the National Q12 Education Partnership. In this talk, I won't focus as much on the details of any specific outreach program, but remain more general and try to make connections to this workshop's goals of quantum engineering at the undergraduate level. A lot of what I'll say is a synthesis actually of conversations that I've had with many members of the community, many of the people participating in this workshop, and my collaborators, of course, Diana and Chandralekha, and members of the Q12 Education Partnership. So, I would view this more as I'm trying to be a spokesperson for some of the efforts going on in K-12 and how those might connect to efforts at the undergraduate level. So in this workshop so far and the numerous other virtual events a lot of us have participated in over the last year, we've heard a lot about the kinds of roles people might work in QIS. There are many others that I'm not listing here, but I mean, obviously a lot of these connect to engineering, and I don't think it's a surprise that even outside of engineering, anyone working in quantum would likely benefit from being enrolled in some of the wonderful general freshman, sophomore level courses that have been touched on during this workshop and also later about applications in the field. And these are offered at some places, but it's really not widespread. You know, so there's a ways to go. I think we all know before making such courses widely available and such, you know, series of courses available broadly to students at different institutions. Earlier this week on Wednesday, Q2Work organized a workshop on processes for bringing QIS into K-12 classrooms. And Diana Franklin from Chicago presented this nice slide to me that captures the opportunity and also the challenges of growing this workforce. We are mostly, as we all know, hanging out in the graduate level with what the coursework available. And there's some at the undergraduate level, and we're, of course, and perhaps people on this panel, a few of us are sprinkled throughout the K-12 and general public area. But, you know, we can make strides now by starting even earlier in the undergraduate. And that's the message we've been hearing. And that's, I think, the purpose of gathering. So key to this will be developing and making QIS material more broadly available and having hands-on experiences, not just the theory coursework, and connecting students to companies and mentors all along the way. And this message will be highlighted throughout this talk. And then hopefully maybe there'll be a good discussion afterwards. So a lot of the push in the last year to going to K-12 has been driven by the long-term benefits of such programs. I'll say that even though I love outreach and science communication and have been doing this, you know, for the last 10 years, spend a lot of time trying to make quantum science appealing and digestible to broad audiences, I was a skeptic. I wasn't always sold on quantum before college as a formal program, but so many teachers and colleagues working on this over the last year or more have changed my thinking. Particularly, I'll note that absent quantum technology being pervasive, normalizing this area of science, which I think is critical, will take a concerted work of people across many sectors of education. It's also going to take people working in science communication, media, deliberately to introduce it in a less intimidating way. And I think, you know, myself and others on this panel can really speak to that. Kids and adults alike need to have connections to real people doing the science and engineering. And that's also the message we're hearing. And they need hands-on experiences throughout. And so for me, I think that all of this together, it's a really big challenge, but there are lots of benefits towards this push to push things broadly into other disciplines and to push them way earlier. And that translates at the early undergraduate level. So in gathering my thoughts for this, I talked to many of you, and I started to assemble information, just a quick, you know, list of the approaches we're seeing at the K-12 level and where people are identifying the ways we should move forward. And all of this at the K-12 is really, I would say, just getting started in terms of QIS. It's been happening in other areas of STEM, but in QIS, this is really new. But we're, you know, using lessons from other areas. A lot of this maps on to the undergrad level. And as the undergrad level matures, I think there's lots of opportunities for actually bridging these two areas together so that there's students coming out of high school have continuity. Particularly, let's go back for a second. Particularly, I'll say that our approach at the K-12 for those who aren't familiar, is not to have a widespread, full-fledged QIS curriculum. It's to start with existing classes, math, physics, chemistry, and CS, where there are CS opportunities, and find entry points for the concepts, and then develop, work with the community. I don't develop curriculum myself, but encourage the community to develop curriculum modules and hands-on experiences around these entry points. I mean, to me, there's a clear similarity with one option for going forward at the undergrad level, that you could start with the existing disciplines and majors and create specializations, and develop courses that promote agility in applying skills. I'll talk a little bit, I'll say a few more words about that later if I have time. I'll say that also critical at the K-12 level is working with teachers as partners, including them in the conversation now, and not later on, and not and viewing them as really experts in their field and coming together to find what works for their classroom. I think this is important to think about too at the undergraduate level, because there's not a lot of people who are teaching QIS at the freshman, sophomore, and even junior levels. And so we need to really find a way, as programs are developed, to invite and empower professors and educators to teach QIS. And this is going to take a lot of investment of time, but investment of resources to succeed. And then I think in both cases, there needs to be looking at the whole student and their environment and their community, and connecting to that so that they have support as they pursue a career in this field. And then, recognizing that even with federal investment and policy, implementation is going to vary depending on the local area. And I think this is also true. And so I hope that these two communities, as we grow, can work together to achieve our goals. And I will say that both of them are going to, as they expand, particularly if institutions pursue full-fledged quantum degree programs, there needs to be a lot of buy-in from organization administrators and support. And this is at the K-12 level, even just to have broad access into or inroads into courses that exist, you need buy-in from school admin. So there's a lot of similarities here. And so I look forward to finding ways to connect on this. So given all of this, I just wrote down a couple of challenges that I see regarding those activities I listed in the previous slide. Like particularly some that I think are going to come up right away are who are going to teach all of these courses, like who are going to teach all these future workers at the K-12 level, and I think also at the undergraduate level, we need investment in this area. And then, we heard this yesterday, I think, and we'll hear some more today. I think people recognize that at both levels, I'll say for my part, courses are not enough. Obviously classroom learning needs to be complemented with lots of different types of learning experiences. Informal in K-12 and beyond, informal learning experiences like games are really useful, museums, but there is limited access with some of these. And so being creative to broaden access is going to be important. And then, having company participation through internships and relationship building and mentorship is also going to be critical. So I think these three, all of these challenges, and I'm sure there are lots of more challenges that I'm not including here, are going to need immediate addressing. And then I do think, being thoughtful about how we design programs can help with the last two challenges, particularly that like this field's going to change. So all the programs need to give students agility, and we need broad support for the long term in case there becomes less interest in this field or investment decreases. We need to have programs now that are designed to be sustainable. Okay, so I think, I don't need to spend too much on this. I think people attending this are well aware that in the fields that contribute to quantum, we need some new intentional approaches, and it's also true in engineering. So, as we think about the quantum engineer and the coursework, we need to do something differently. And I do think that starting early and the undergraduate level can help a lot. And I think that's all I'll say about that. But, what we've been doing in these fields, I know there are a lot of good things happening, but we need to think differently. So I'll now highlight like one or two opportunities that I see that could be included in this report. With engineering specifically, I think this is more familiar to students as a stable, rewarding career with financial security. And I think that this is important. I think that students possibly are less familiar with the STEM fields themselves, like physics being a career, but engineering, I think, is more familiar. So that's an opportunity for us to connect quantum to. And community colleges play a role currently in training engineers, and they provide an affordable pathway into this field. Many high school students first encounter college at community colleges, just broadly speaking, and then also students, they start their engineering pathway in community college and then transfer to a four-year engineering program at a four-year institution. And then I think that, and I hope that we'll hear more about this later on when Thomas talks about from Howard University talks about the HBCU initiative, or I hope we get a chance to hear about that. But HBCU and MSIs play a major role in preparing students that identify as Black, African American, Hispanic, Latina for science and engineering fields. This is really important. We need to go to where the students are at. We can't just keep the same methods. And, I think going on that, mentor, I won't say too much more and hammer on this, but I think we hear my message is we need more mentorship. But if we follow the same outreach playbook, the same current methods for treating scientists or training scientists, then we can expect much the same in terms of diversity in numbers. So I mentioned Thomas Searles from Howard. I've talked to him quite a bit about this, and I like what he says, and I like what others say in the outreach community and science education community, that we need to connect to students where they're at. And that means going to their communities and connecting with them. And then it won't work if we just expect students to sort of meander into the quantum courses that are being developed at the undergraduate level. And then I will say that, from my viewpoint, broadly speaking, I think the momentum around quantum education is an opportunity to use the excitement around quantum as a lever for improving education approaches overall in many of the related STEM fields. So I just have a few more minutes, and I promised I would say some words about what the programs that have been happening. So I'll stop with my comments of the overlap now and the challenges and opportunity, and just say a few words about what is being done currently at the K-12 QIS education level. This is by no means comprehensive, and so if I left a program out, I very much apologize, and contact me, and I'm trying to get a comprehensive understanding of what's out there. But last year, myself and others were invited to a workshop for developing key concepts around QIS. It was very interesting. The attendees ranged from high school teachers to government scientists, academics, to museum educators, and it really reflects what we're seeing right now in the community. I think when the pandemic hit, most of us thought this actual workshop would be canceled, but we were able to have it, and I'm very excited that it's seeded so much interest. I was really impressed with my colleagues in this workshop and how passionate they were about drafting these concepts. And that's important. They were just a draft to set a direction. And so I think, oh, hang on, my computer's asking for updates. So let me just see if I can move this. I apologize. Theresa, are you still able to? Okay, I think
Yes,
I'm back.
okay.
I think I'm back okay. It was like a big pop-up and the screen went dark, so I apologize. So, so the concepts were posted in May 2020, and they cover fundamentals, and they were intended to be a starting point that can set a direction. And now we're planning the expansion of those concepts to make them appropriate for high school and the public. So that's very exciting and ongoing work. Following that, there were many programs announced this summer. I think this community knows. I list a few here. And what's exciting is that broadly speaking, QISE education is wrapped up in all of these programs, and more are happening all the time. And not a week goes by when I don't hear about more teachers that are excited about introducing QIS into their classrooms. And then, of course, there's the recent Dear Colleague letter inviting QIS education proposals. So I put that number up there for reference if you're not familiar with it yet. I know it was mentioned yesterday. And then, you know, in 2020, the National Q12 Education Partnership was announced, which is a group of companies and professional societies really invested in providing resources towards advancing QIS education for K-12. And so we're excited about that. Q2Work is the academic partner on that and helping lead this partnership. And so, you know, Q2Work has a couple of objectives centered around supporting growth of a robust quantum education ecosystem. Our program spans K through grade, but obviously from everything you've heard, we're particularly focused on K-12 and non-expert public audiences. These are two groups where there are significant gaps. And I'd love to talk more with you if you're interested in this program and how you might connect to it. I think that many of us working in quantum outreach and education agree that broadly increasing quantum awareness and literacy across K-12 and the public is critical for us as a society to fully realize the promise of quantum-driven technologies. So Q2Work activities are done in collaboration with the National Q12 Education Partnership and the community. And we are primarily right now working on establishing an online hub that there's been much discussion and need around, and sharing teacher experiences and expanding the key concepts. And so I'm happy to tell you more about that. If you're interested, just reach out. And I said that I would say something about in the list of questions about what something about what a quantum engineer is. And I think from my conversations with the community and also listening to what others said yesterday, I don't think a quantum engineer is a mythical creature. I don't think it's unachievable. I think it's just slightly unusual currently, given what the courses are available. And for UIUC's part, I think we're gonna, you know, we're looking at the pathways towards specialization in each of the core fields of CS, physics, and engineering, and math as the quickest way to test out the waters and build capacity, and allow there to be some research around developing new courses. But I think, you know, our implementation is going to be very different, but I hope that, you know, each implementation will lead us to agile, skilled workforce that is diverse. Thank you so much.
Excuse me. Thank you very much for a great talk, Emily, that I think has already generated a buzz in the chat and the question and answer about issues that bubbled towards the surface yesterday that people really want to focus on and get more deeply into today. And we'll have a chance to do that in the Q&A. Our next speaker is Judith Klein-Seetharaman from the Colorado School of Mines, where she is an associate professor in the chemistry department. Judith has been a faculty member at a number of institutions in the United States and the UK in the chemistry departments, in biology and biomedical sciences departments. And she's here with us today to talk about developing interdisciplinary undergraduate programs, in particular interdisciplinary engineering programs, having been instrumental in that process in bioengineering and quantitative biosciences at the Colorado School of Mines. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. So I've put together a couple of thoughts of lessons learned regarding convergence education and building undergraduate and graduate programs across disciplinary boundaries. So this is the list of ideas that I'd like to put forward. And so the first one is, I think what is a key is to be able to communicate across disciplinary boundaries. And what I have found particularly helpful is the use of analogies. So one analogy is shown here. 20 years ago, when the human genome was published, it was hailed as the book of life. And that analogy actually enabled a collaboration between computer scientists who had been working on language technologies, such as developing search engines and speech translation systems, and biology, because you can think of how the analogies in language would map to biology. And this allowed developing approaches where you basically just take methods that were developed for one application and apply them to a new application, and therefore make much faster progress than if you had to develop new methodology from scratch. And so we've recently used an analogy again in a currently funded NSF project on harnessing the data revolution that came out of an NSF Ideas Lab, where we view corals as 3D printers. And so that analogy allows us to bring together computer scientists, material scientists, and coral biologists that had not been working together previously. The next aspect, I think, key is to be able to teach the essentials that are needed for quantum computing, in this case, to students that come from different disciplines. So rather than having everybody have to learn different disciplines from scratch, make sure that they are able to learn only those parts that are essential and leave the rest up to flexibility. I think one key aspect is interviewing stakeholders, both on and off campus, and identify suitable partners. And the lesson that I've learned is that there's a lot of appreciation in listening to other people's opinions in order to identify what are the key aspects that need to be addressed. And that will then allow identifying partners and people that have an interest in this area, such as established industries, startup companies, depending on the different applications, have representatives from all of the possible application areas and what their needs are. Then, of course, nonprofit organizations, consultants, networking, investing companies, and last but not least, of course, universities. And so that then requires assembling faculty of interest at the given institution or set of institutions. And I think that there's always going to be those that have a major invested interest and those that do something that is somehow related. And so this is how one can divide them, maybe by core faculty versus affiliated faculty in a program. And they then have to come together and listen to each other in order to build a vision together. So the vision, you know, requires some generic as well as some very specific aspects. But I think the generic ones will always involve increasing the visibility of research, education, and entrepreneurship, all three of them in this particular area. And they will require developing methods for fostering collaboration between the university community as well as the stakeholders like industries and nonprofit organizations, etc. And then requires also setting up networking opportunities that will allow exchange on the one hand, but also create a pipeline for the students to actually find jobs in this area. And so that will hinge critically upon creating collaborations with relevant industry through student and faculty projects. And of course, this can be built gradually. One can start with building a minor before one develops a full-fledged degree program. And at the graduate level, it can start with a certificate, then move on to a master's or PhD. And the education pipeline requires that really all of these aspects are researched and documented. So there has to be a good justification for the name, demonstrated need, student demand, industry demand, and also why is this unique for this particular institution at this time. So this is just some examples, you know, in terms of, for example, demonstrating increased course enrollments, perhaps conducting surveys with students in terms of demonstrating the need and interest in this, difficulties that are perhaps are present with existing programs that don't allow for the interdisciplinarity and etc. So these are all requirements, I think. Last but not least, resources, faculty time, program administrator space, equipment, and demonstrating the need from a job perspective and networking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've really pinpointed some of the issues that we need to tackle in our remaining time. And I'm sure we will have more questions about that as we go to the panel. Our next speaker is Martin Laforest, who is a member of the product management team at ISARA Corporation. And before moving to ISARA, was the head of scientific outreach at IQC at the University of Waterloo. And Martin will talk to us, I think, from the outreach point of view in terms of developing tools to involve quantum information science learners early.
Yes, thank you, Theresa. Yeah, like you mentioned, for those who was wondering why a product manager is on an educational panel, I spent about 10 years of my career as the original head of scientific outreach at the Institute for Quantum Computing, which had really early on a strategic initiative to bring quantum computing and quantum technology to as many people as possible, and at the same time have the added benefit of starting the pipeline for the new graduate that will focus on that will have a quantum career. So we started in 2010, and we developed a very robust grassroots approach to quantum outreach and education. And what I mean by this is we left no rock unturned. So we were doing outreach to general public, high school student, even sometimes primary school student, undergraduate, graduate, professionals, government, industry. So I left the Institute 2 years ago, but that work keeps on, is being continued, bonified, and expanded today because the job has been taken over by John Donahue, which I believe is in the audience today. So still a lot of effort being done there. So lots of talk is being done, is been happening on the role of undergraduate education in quantum engineering and quantum career, which is all great, and I'm all supportive of that. So I wanted to maybe bring my perspective on earlier education. And we decided to focus, not necessarily to focus, but to spend a lot of time and effort for the younger student, grade, let's say we're starting roughly around grade 10, 11, and 12, for a few reasons. So one, just the word quantum is getting very, very hot. It has a lot of attention. It's been like that for about 10, 15 years. So a lot of potential, scientists, physicists, mathematicians, engineers have heard that term, but did not really know what it was for. So we thought it would be a nice little niche to offer some high school programming to really maybe bring on early on those young kids that are interested. So we've developed a variety of programs. Some of them, the main one being a 10-day summer school in the summer, where we're bringing about 45 students from all around the world, where we give them a complete primer on quantum computing, quantum cryptography, just quantum mechanics. So very general, but extremely hands-on. So it covers math, physics, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of computer science. When we started doing that, the nice computer science approach like Qiskit or Cirq or Forest did not exist. So so now we're starting to include that a bit more. Later on, we realized how could we expand that? It's good for us to meet about 1,000, 1,500 students face-to-face a year, but how can we scale that up to reach to even more students? So we started working with teachers. And working with teachers was really a new challenge because, here I'm talking from a Canadian's perspective, but I think in the United States it's fairly similar because I had the chance to work with several American teachers, is, well, first of all, quantum takes a very small place in the curriculum. And also turns out that a lot of the physics teacher, high school physics teacher in Canada are not physicists or don't have a physics background. Often they will come from mathematics or chemistry or sometimes an engineering background. So talking with hundreds and hundreds of teachers, they all pretty much had the same comment, is that they are somewhat intimidated by quantum mechanics, and most often they're not. Their knowledge of quantum mechanics is basically restricted to what they've learned in the textbook they're using in their class. So we decided to start making a big push to start to give teachers the tools and the confidence to bring more of the quantum, the quantum concept in their classroom, while while following the curriculum that they have. So we have developed about 12 lesson plan where we introduce quantum concept, but to make it even more tangible, all of these concepts are then shown in a quantum technology perspective. So for example, we have a great lesson plan which lasts about an hour and a half explaining the concept of measurement and superposition, and then we use that to apply it to an activity that involves quantum cryptography. So the reason why we spend a lot of time with high school students is because we believe that in order to build a robust workforce or quantum aware workforce, it's not just having the engineers and scientists being quantum aware, but anyone who's going to go into communication, business development, or just straight up business, so have at least some knowledge of quantum. And also, we think it's to be successful in quantum, having a good intuition about quantum phenomena, which is, let's be honest, quite counterintuitive and a little bit outside of our intuition of the world. So if to build an intuition, it starts early on before they get too used to the classical world. So I'm not going to talk about all the effort we did on the undergraduate and graduate side because other people will talk about that, but I thought I wanted to pass the message that having a strong quantum education at the undergraduate level is good, but I strongly believe that we need to introduce the concepts early on, maybe as soon as middle school even. So I'll wrap up for here, and I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A period.
Thank you, Martin. You make a very strong and impassioned case, and I see that some of the programs that you mentioned are being linked right now in the Google Doc for those who are interested in following up more on that. Our next speaker is Heather Lewandowski, professor of physics at the University of Colorado and Gilla Fellow. And as many of you no doubt know, she runs research programs both in cold molecules and in physics education research. I believe that Heather's going to talk with us today wearing a hat that really comes partially from her role as a PI of the QEDC survey that we've already heard mentioned yesterday, in terms of looking at the needs expressed by industry that could be addressed in various modes in undergraduate education, and asking us what is the role of undergraduate education in preparing the quantum workforce.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the results from a study that myself, Michael Fox at Colorado, and Ben Zwickel at RIT did about a year ago now, looking at industry input into creating new educational roles at higher education. The QR code here links to the paper as well as the URL at the bottom if you'd like to know more of the details that I'll be able to present today. So just to give you an idea of the methodology, we interviewed people from 21 different companies across the quantum industry in fall 2019. These are in-depth interviews lasting from 1 to 1.5 hours each. So we're really able to dig down and get industry input on this. We recruited through the QEDC mailing list and also included snowball sampling in our methodology. So here's an example of the companies that we interviewed. So the red bars here, the lower bars, are the ones in our study, and the blue are what represented the QEDC companies at that point in time. To give you an idea of the types of companies we interviewed, folks who were working in sensors to all the way to facilitating technologies like cryogenics and lasers. So that is the background. So some of the outcomes from this study sort of echoed some of the things that the QEDC has found through their surveys. If we look at what are the career opportunities, this is a percent of companies that were employing people in these roles. So if you look at these top 5 technical jobs, including engineering, experimental scientist, theorist, technician, and application researcher, and the definitions are included in the paper. But really digging into this a little bit more, as you notice, 95% of the people we interviewed had engineers on their workforce, their quantum workforce, self-identified. If you look at the types of engineers that were employed, you see the sort of typical, we really see a lot of electrical engineers, some software, where this is not necessarily quantum software, but maybe more traditional software engineering, mechanical engineering, and so forth. So these are the types of engineering jobs that these companies sort of identified as key components in their workforce. If we look at what kind of skills were valued by the quantum industry, so here you can see the main skills and knowledge that they identified. Number 1 is coding. This is not anything fancy. This is classical coding, right? The idea that is really dominant throughout all the jobs in the quantum industry, as well as statistical methods for data analysis really showed up strongly in this study, as well as lab experience electronics, right? We're looking often at a lot more of the hardware side of things, and so this naturally comes up quite a bit. If you look at some of the routes into the quantum jobs in terms of the sort of degree level and subject of what they identified their current employees had, the number 1 was actually a PhD in physics. And that maybe is not surprising, as we're really talking about a lot of R&D at this point and a little bit less product development and sales. So that was the number 1 noted job. The second one was a bachelor's in engineering, right? So more than half of the companies identified that they had people working in their quantum section of their company had a bachelor's in engineering. And then there were a variety of other types of routes in there, sort of standard sort of things from PhD in engineering right down to some different roles in PhD and associate degree in engineering. So some of the new training that they felt that was needed, so we asked them what were the main roles that higher education could play going forward. So generally across all the companies, a couple of main things came out. One was that they really had a high value associated with hands-on experience. That was something that they really continued to talk about in most of the interviews. And generally they were satisfied with the skills and knowledge of PhD physics graduates. So those are areas we want to continue to focus on hands-on experience, and we don't really need to mess with the PhD program. For undergraduate engineers, often they would say, well, what we really need is a basic or maybe 2 basic courses in quantum information. So they identified a software and a hardware track, which we've heard about here, and industry also identified that with software and algorithms for more CS and software engineers, versus a hardware track, right, for device physics, qubit control electronics. And those were more typical that they thought were better for electrical, mechanical, and optical engineers. Additionally, trying to give a broader skill set for physics students at the undergraduate level. Things that they felt were missing that really could improve the physics degree were working collaboratively on software, right? Collaborative coding, like Git and other things. Having that idea of not one person working on coding, but a team was really missing from the physics degree, as well as engineering and system design skills, right? Getting more of those skills into the sort of physics curriculum could help from that direction. Other important outcomes that we saw from this study, one is that industry is evolving and quantum engineer is not well defined. I think we've heard that a lot. I would say of over 21 different companies, we probably have 21 different definitions of what a quantum engineer is. So we have to be careful using that word and really define what we need in context of a particular program or degree. Second is that industry still really wants a lot of well-trained traditional engineers who also know a bit of quantum. And this was at the sort of minor level knowledge. A couple of extra courses may be a minor. They still really need awesome electrical engineers with some quantum knowledge, so they can work on interdisciplinary teams with physicists, computer scientists, and the like. So that was another major outcome of the study. And finally, just something I'd like to bring up, because we haven't quite heard maybe what I consider enough of this, is we really need to start discussing the efficacies of courses and programs, right? We've talked a lot about, what should be in the courses and what courses should we offer, but not how we teach them, right? I think it is critical that as we develop new programs from scratch, right? This is an exciting opportunity really to try to change the paradigm of how we engage students in this material and these courses to really follow best practices. So I think that is also very important. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather. And I should say, maybe this is a good time to mention that you may not have fully explored the workshop website, but the paper that Heather told us about today is certainly listed along with a number of other things that we have heard about and talked about on the tab Quantum Education Resources on the workshop website. So you may want to go there. Our final speaker for this session is Spiros Michalakis. Spiros comes to us from Caltech, where he is a research staff member and manager of outreach for the Institute for Quantum Information and Matter. Spiros has an impressive list of film credits for quantum related things, which I won't go further into, but I was really interested in hearing about. He's going to talk to us today about quantum games as a window into quantum outreach and education, and he's joined by Chris Cantwell, a quantum chess collaborator.
Thank you, Theresa. It's really nice to be here. Let me just share my screen. So I want to discuss briefly today, and we can discuss more during the panel, quantum games as a platform for training quantum engineers, and specifically the quantum software developers of the future that will be hopefully hardware aware. I think that's going to be important. And this is something that for me started about 6 years ago when Chris walked into my office at Caltech. At the time, he was a graduate student at USC, and he had just developed a very basic version of a quantum game, kind of like quantum checkers. And he wanted to know if I could help develop this with him further. And a few years later, we had quantum chess, which became a bit of a sensation when we produced this video. We asked some friends to play against each other. They had a lot of fun. We put it on YouTube. It went viral, and that was great because then every time we would do outreach and bring the actual game to classes, the kids would be like, oh, this is just like that video. It's like, the Paul Rudd from the quantum realm. And we found that fascinating. But as we started developing the game further, we realized that while working with Google Quantum AI over the past year and a half, there was a potential for the game, the actual process of developing the game and trying to put it on a quantum computer where you could play the game on a quantum computer to be a platform to train future quantum engineers. The actual process that Chris went through could be something that could be a class at a university. And to give you a bit of perspective on this one, as Chris was developing the game, he realized that something was different in the quantum realm. You couldn't just address and observe the state of the game willy-nilly. You just couldn't do it, because if it was something that you were supposed to be able to outsource to quantum hardware, as we know, you're not allowed to observe it, right? So this changed his relationship to game development and also made him much more aware of everything going on the hardware side. And here you can see that the quantum game has both a classical state and a quantum state, and you're trying to outsource as little as possible of specifically the quantum state to some part of the quantum hardware, specifically somewhere on the cloud. And it could be anything. It could be services that Google provides, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, anyone. And we realized at that point that it was a really interesting opportunity to teach someone how to code in these quantum languages, right? To be able to interface with these quantum engines in the cloud. And also to use simulators, right? And to understand both from a point of view of how things are working on the simulator and what falls apart when you actually have a realistic error model coming from the actual universe, and what that does to gameplay. And to kind of give you more of a sense of what this looks like, I think, Chris, if you can share your screen, it'd be great to see. Let me see if I can.
You have to stop sharing first.
I'm trying to find a way here. Here we go.
All right. So I'm just going to show a little bit of gameplay right now. So if you can see my screen, you see a quantum chessboard on the left, and then on the right is a terminal view of a REST server that is currently connected to Google's quantum hardware. And so you can see if I put a move in on the left, so I want to split this knight. This is one of the moves you can do in quantum chess. It creates superposition where the knight can exist on both A3 and C3. And you see over on the right, a little ASCII view of the probability distribution that came back. One of the other things that you see is right above this little ASCII board, discarded 87 from error mitigation, 98 from noise, and 0 from post-selection. So one of the things that we had to do when we were creating this interface with the quantum hardware is put in some amount of error mitigation and post-selection to make sure the state tracked with the current board state given the moves the player performed. So I can also do like moving this pawn forward 2 steps. In classical chess, that is a legal move as long as the square in between is empty. Here you have a square, a knight in superposition in between, so this creates an entangled state between the pawn and the knight. You can also see kind of an ASCII version of this circuit. It actually performed on hardware here. Unfortunately, the circuit's too big, so it kind of line wraps and doesn't show very well. And then if I move this black pawn forward, I'll show you a move that performs a measurement. And we still don't have any post-selection, but if we try this measuring move, we might get some post-selection out of it. It does take a few seconds because it's connecting to actual quantum hardware. Or we might have run into the time limit. I know that the chip was going on maintenance soon, so, oh, there it goes. It's running another 6,000 samples there, and so we get the result. And so you see that 1,249 boards, these are represented in bit boards, which are 64 qubits essentially, were thrown away from post-selection. And you can even see some of the errors from the hardware creeping in, where it measured and it found that this pawn was on C4 so that it could perform this capture, or no, sorry, other way around. The pawn was not on C4 so that it couldn't perform the capture, which means the pawn was on C2. And you see that it's not quite 100%. You get some errors creeping in from running on actual hardware, and the knight collapsed to increase some probability to be on C3 to have blocked that move. So you had to deal with a lot of these software engineering principles for connecting to actual quantum hardware. So I'll cut it off there. I know we're short on time.
Thank you so much. I would love to watch that in greater detail and spend a lot more time on it, but we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I'd like to move us towards that. I'm going to start right off with a question from Elliot that has received a lot of upvotes, and that occurred to me as well right at the beginning of Emily's talk. In terms of recruiting, and so this is really a question for everybody, I would say, on the panel, in terms of recruiting students, particularly underrepresented students, to quantum information science and engineering, what do you think the right balance is between presenting quantum as weird, amazing, sci-fi, cool factor, compared to ordinary, intuitive, sensible, thus less intimidating?
Well, I can go. Personally, I always hated using the word weird and sci-fi, because it's not. You know, we like to portray it as something weird, but something counterintuitive for sure, something that gets out of the, our everyday life for sure. But unfortunately, if we start attracting people by saying, hey, come here because I'm going to show you something super weird, super cool, super sci-fi, it's not really scalable. Like, you can get their attention for a minute, you won't get their attention for 35 years. Maybe that's me being a bit old-fashioned on this, but I don't think it's a good way to attract people for a career. It might be a good a good parlor trick or a good quote on the stage, but for bringing people into this as a career, which is a significant commitment, they should get in it for the right reason. It's just my grumpy old self comment that way.
I wanted to add something to this. So just a minute ago, you saw superposition and entanglement, right? Full on as it's happening, like in the quantum realm, right? Like on quantum hardware that is out there right now. And it was nothing but just a couple of moves on the chessboard, right? So imagine a little kid playing, and this has happened already, right? I've experienced this, going to local schools in Pasadena area and had the kids play quantum chess, and just making that move where you do a split, and all of a sudden, the next move underneath the hood is a controlled I swap, right? This is like a controlled unitary, and it creates entanglement, right? But they don't even know that. They're just like trying to move one piece through another. And all of a sudden they have entangled things, and they can keep doing these things without really knowing even that they're doing something magical, right? And they can build that intuition without ever feeling that it is weird. And that's actually why Chris created the game in the first place. When he came to me, he was like, I want kids and everyone to feel about quantum the way we feel about gravity. Almost none of us understands like the mathematics of gravity, right? Unless you understand general relativity really well. But we all know exactly what's going to happen, right? And how gravity affects our lives. Like, we just have this intuitive, like, visual notion. And through these games, originally they were developed for that purpose. And I think it'd be really cool to transform them also into a platform for training engineers.
So,
yeah, I want to mention something from, oh, sorry, Emily, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think that, right now there's just not balance. There's a lot of ways to connect to students and learners. And quantum, one of the great disservices, or at least I can say that looking back, I have the benefit of hindsight, but that the way that quantum has been presented as spooky, inaccessible, sci-fi, whatever you want to say, too difficult to understand for anybody other than the most advanced scientists. The way that it's been presented is unbalanced and is unlikely to resonate with lots of students. I mean, I don't think, one thing I think we need is a more balanced approach that despookifies and lowers barriers. And I would love to also see a research program on what works for the different groups and different communities, because I think we just don't have the data, to your point of like, in particularly recruiting underrepresented students that have been traditionally underrepresented in these fields. I think we just don't have the data, but my intuition is that we have such a narrow approach, we would really benefit from a more broader way of doing outreach.
Yeah, these are all great comments on connecting to the public, and I've done a lot of those kinds of outreach talks myself, including to the quantum healing crowd, which is quite an experience, to try. And I wanted to mention that there are antecedents of quantum logic, even before binary logic, before Aristotle. And so for people that are oriented toward philosophy and history, maybe that's not high school students, but I don't know, maybe some of them, but certainly there are a lot of adults who are very interested. There's a whole side of the quantum community that could be talking to those folks. And that's a lot of the interest in quantum is actually from the spooky stuff, which people wrap up in their spirituality. So, if you go back to thinking from Piro and from Nagarjuna, with the fourfold logic, right? This actually are specific points on the block sphere. And that can be a great starting point for that massive part of American culture that is interested in quantum, but doesn't get the tech or the science side. They like the spooky side, So I just wanted to mention that quantum logic actually is before binary logic. And when you show people that from that community, they get very excited and then they get into the tech. So it's a great way to bring them in.
this is a great discussion. I think often coming from the research side, we're so eager to and trained to emphasize the novelty of what we are doing, how cutting edge it is, how different, that we need to broaden the discussion in terms of getting a larger group of people interested in coming in the door in the first place, sort of the relevance and potentially common application is maybe one of the things we don't talk about as much. A lot of questions that came into the chat in particular relate to this question of how early to do quantum info. And so I'm going to ask the OSA folks to present the first of two poll questions as we get into a series of discussions about that. And hopefully we're going to have a poll question now for everyone to weigh in on how early it would be useful for students to be in a dedicated quantum engineering degree program. We may not have exactly the right bins here. Because a lot of the questions and discussion have really been, and this is an important issue for the whole workshop, to think about how early it makes sense to be studying the specialized field of quantum engineering. As people are still responding here, let me ask a question that comes from the chat. Is the Q through 12 consortium discussing the different approaches throughout the K to 12 path on a much more granular level? Is K very different from elementary and from high school as far as how to approach and engage? And I think this relates to a question from the Q&A as well. There's been a lot of discussion about high school being the starting point for introducing QIS formally, which makes sense with current science standards. Is there any rationale for starting in elementary and middle school? So questions about the difference between high school and before high school.
So I can say that the efforts that that I see happening and that I'm involved in and related to the Q12 and Q to work are that we are looking at granularity as described. So both granularity in discipline and granularity in age group. Right now, the first priorities for a lot of the teachers working in this area are middle school and high school and getting that up and running. And I think there needs to be a lot more education research, though, on going much earlier. But there are middle school teachers, science teachers, and high school teachers really engaged in the developing out that granularity.
Yeah, from my perspective, so you know, so you can sort of do a gross simplification and saying like there's quantum mechanics and then quantum phenomena, and then there's the application of it to quantum science and engineering and technology. Starting to go down and teaching, you know, quantum sensors and quantum computing and quantum programming to grade 5 students, I don't think makes any sense. But I think yesterday somebody, I think it was a gentleman from AWS, he said that, you know, one of the skills that we're looking at a lot in our workers is adaptability, because things are moving so fast. Our researchers and our engineers needs to learn and adapt really quickly. And personally, I believe that for people to be really adaptable and real quick, you need to build a very solid foundation. And that can start early, right? So here I'm not talking necessarily about explaining, you know, quantum tunneling and semiconductors at grade 5, but if you start getting them to understand that, you know, there's a difference between particles and waves, and then, you know, when you start looking at waves from a different perspective, they behave slightly differently, and then from that it's kind of easy later on to start talking about quantum effects. So you build, so it's like a pyramid, you build a foundation real quick, and then once you want to learn more more specific applied things, then it's just changing the tip of the pyramid, so you can adapt really, really quickly. Because nowadays, you know, we still have people starting a physics degree or an engineering degree that has no clue what physics is or what engineering is. They just went into it because they heard it was a great job, but they start from nothing. So they might be on a bit more shaky foundation. So I think I don't see teaching quantum mechanics early on necessarily as because we want to groom them to be quantum engineer at the end of the day, but it's just to get the people, the general population, a good understanding of the world around us, because ultimately that's what it is. It's our world. Why don't we teach quantum mechanics, which is how the world behaves? Why is it not in the curriculum just for the sake of knowing? Right? It drives me nuts. It's like if we were teaching English literature and we would stop at Shakespeare and then nothing after that. That's kind of what we're doing nowadays. And right, we teach classical mechanics and that's where we finish. What happened in the last 120 years? A whole lot happened. Actually, our entire society drives on that science. So
that's for the last 2 weeks of school after the exams.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we need to revisit that. And a lot of this, I think, comes from offering as much support as possible to teachers, because they're the one who's going to make it happen, and we need them on our side.
So you should be seeing a second poll question that's a little bit different, not about enrollment in a dedicated program, but about when it would be useful for students to have this in mind. We'll keep that open for about another minute and close it, if that's all right, AJ. Let me move to another question from the chat, if I can get back to it. Here. This is a question about the key concepts, the 9 key concepts for future QIS learners. We posted them yesterday and talked about them yesterday, and a discussion arose in the Google Doc about whether they were what they were key concepts for. Somebody pointed out that they were mostly science and not engineering, and there was a little discussion about what that meant. Are they key concepts for engineering and tech or for science? Does the list need to be updated, extended, or reduced or modified for quantum engineering?
Yeah, I think that's something I can address. So the key concepts, the ask was to come up with a list of concepts that were for quantum information science. But there was intentional thought put towards including concepts about applications. And again, these were the first draft was supposed to be a framework to then extend them to earlier learners, where they may not be, thinking as much about the different sub areas of engineering, for instance, and how QIS connects to them. But it's, and then also to be expanded for the public. And yes, they could certainly be expanded to be more tailored towards an engineering student down the road. But they were written with mostly some applications. So I think 3 of them have more application and technical focus or technology focus. The definition of quantum information science is supposed to, with the supporting material, be more future looking. And then the other ones were about the science itself, I would say, and not so much about applying it in engineering, other than the ones about applications. So that would be my summary of how they were, but they could certainly be built out. And should be, should say, and should be.
Great, thank you. There are a couple questions about the mechanics of getting a program started from the Q&A. How can one demonstrate things like increased, and these may be particularly for Judith or for anyone really, how can one demonstrate things like increased course enrollment or interest in terms of demonstrating to one's administration a need for a new program? How do you demonstrate things like increased course enrollment or interest, et cetera, for when many of the topics are going to be new? What types of supporting data can help that argument for courses and topics that don't exist yet, at least?
So yeah, that's an excellent question, of course. So it would have to be courses that are related, where there is reason to believe that students are enrolling in those courses because they have perhaps heard that this is something that is useful for them to learn about. If you don't have anything, then the best thing to do is to conduct a survey and ask the students, if the university was offering a degree in quantum computing, would you take it? Would you enroll it? So ask for a minor, ask for an undergraduate program, and those are the kind of things that university administration and faculty across universities usually are viewing very favorably. And then, of course, there's always market research, right? So if there's support for obtaining external data that demonstrates that that this would be useful for enrollment and interest from the students, that that would also be very helpful usually.
I'd like to get us to talk a little bit in our last 10 minutes or so about the role of collaboration between different institutions. There was a question from the chat that came up also in the Google Doc. Is Q12 exploring direct connection opportunities between undergrads and high schools? And then in the Google Doc, a suggestion that students going back to their schools could be an effective outreach mechanism, as well as really an educational opportunity for the students. So let's start there with that kind of institution to institution connection. Any thoughts on that?
So the second one or the first one?
Either.
I think I put a comment in the doc with respect to the students going back, and I think this plays an important role for student. I mean, I think that's part of mentorship, and also for highlighting people working in quantum industry will help students see themselves in those future careers. And that's something that I think requires a pretty comprehensive outreach campaign. And so that lots of companies and employers involved in highlighting their workers for students, and then to make it more scalable rather than ad hoc. But I think these things are great. I absolutely support having alumni come back and making connections with students. That's what's going to make this work.
And I could perhaps add to the institution-to-institution collaboration. I think this is really useful, number one, to increase the critical mass. So if there's some budding interest in one institution and in the other, then together they can form a stronger program. And then there's, of course, complementarity. So if there's one field that's covered by one institution more than the other, then putting them together will make a stronger program as well. It requires, of course, that there has to be a mechanism in place for the institutions to get credit for the resources that they put into the program, and for the students to be clear about where they're receiving their degree from and things like that.
Thank you. I'd like to raise the question of internships. So we talked a lot about different ways that industry interacts with education yesterday, but we didn't talk so much about internships as a possible tool for recruitment and retention of students, for hands-on experience with students. And I know that's something that some of these panelists, some of you on the panel, are really prepared to discuss. Can I invite you to talk about that?
Well, I can talk about not necessarily internship in companies, because again, right, I left IQC in 2018, where the idea of internship in companies was non-existent, essentially. A lot changed in the last 2 years, great. But what I can talk about is we've developed a significantly large internship program at the Institute, and essentially we're treating it as a pipeline to our graduate program. And not only was it extremely popular by the end, because again, quantum is hot, so every student in undergraduate degree would like to have some experience working in either in the lab or in the theory group in quantum. And when you're in a large institution, they also can come in and be exposed to all all the facets of quantum computing, quantum technology. So for us, as an academic tools, it was really, really good because, again, I can take myself as an example. When I signed up to do my PhD in quantum computing, I did not really know what it was. Luckily for me, I fell in love with it. But honestly, when I started, I knew what a qubit was, and that was it. So internship, I think, really helped not only bring people in your lab and help out, but it's kind of a very affordable way to select top student, retain them, and then bring them around. So I think internship should be almost a mandatory part of it, undergraduate education. And coming from University of Waterloo, which has a huge co-op program, it's already baked in. But I think more universities should embrace either the co-op model or encourage undergraduate students or even high school students, if possible, to do some internship so that they get. And also, I think it will ease the massive transition between undergrad and grad studies, which are very, very different type of environment.
So I would like to add that I agree with you. I think that internships are an extremely valuable tool, and when available is extremely useful from all kinds of perspectives for the student experience, as well as in students networking with potential employers. And we've seen this in many cases where internships then have led to job opportunities for the students. However, I would like to caution on making it mandatory. So in our program here, we also thought, yes, of course, the benefits far outweigh anything else, and we should make it mandatory. And I got a lot of resistance from the university in making it mandatory, because there is just not enough opportunities usually. And so you don't want a student not be able to graduate because they haven't been able to find an internship that's suitable for them. And so I think especially when a program is young, you have to be very flexible. And I think the students really appreciate flexibility a lot. You of course have to put measures into place to make sure that they do the same amount of work for the number of credits that you give them, and have pipelines for dealing with that administratively. But I think flexibility is key.
As I posted in the chat, we'll be taking an extra few minutes, so we won't break until the half hour. I have a question on a slightly different subject here that comes from the chat. It's a question probably for Heather. Heather, you really explicitly called on us in the panel to do, or in your talk, to do some collaborative work in engineering education or quantum engineering education. Many of us, including me in this meeting, are more physicists than engineers. What is the status of engineering education research in terms of what's the landscape and the investment there as compared to physics education research? And what are the possibilities for joint funding toward quantum engineering education research, if you know of them?
Yeah, great. I mean, there's a well-established community of education research, both within engineering and sciences, and in particular discipline-based. In other words, these types of activities are happening within departments at universities and colleges that really have that disciplinary knowledge. There is, just like engineering and physics research, silos and barriers to having those really sort of talk and collaborate. And hopefully that we can go forward is actually starting to break those down on the research of how to really best stand up these programs, right? We don't want to have a bunch of programs on the book that follow very traditional models that are really ineffective in many ways. And so I'm hoping that there's opportunities out there. On the NSF QLCI, there was a program manager from NSF and said, well, money's no longer the problem at NSF, it's just getting people to do it. So I'm going to take him at his word, and hopefully that we can start building those bridges, because I think we do need to start working together across engineering and physics in general.
Great, thank you. I want to, I want to pose one more question. We talked a little bit, but not nearly as much as we could, about helping quantum engineering attract and retain a diverse group of students. And I thought it was really interesting that both Emily and Heather spoke about trying to use quantum engineering as a jumping off point for getting things more correct in a set of fields already established that are related to quantum engineering. Can you talk about one thing that we might be able to get right in quantum engineering from the beginning that could propagate to other fields? Maybe that's too hard a question, and it's for anybody on the panel.
I can say something to this. It's actually a pretty amazing effort by an organization called the Coding School based in New York. And they have a program called Qubit by Qubit. IBM has sponsored this for a while. I know Google also is helping out. And they have almost 10,000 students from around the world, extremely diverse makeup of these students, socioeconomically, from a racial perspective, gender. And they're teaching these kids quantum computing. They're not just waiting for us to figure it out. They're just going for it, right? And they're hoping to partner with anyone who will listen to do workshops, right? To provide resources, and they're building curriculum around it. They are holding tomorrow, I think, a workshop on diversity in quantum. And it's really nice because it's a very young and diverse group of individuals who are running this effort from MIT and other places as well. And I think that's really great. I think that these are the kind of opportunities where we've discussed with Kira, who is running the show, how can we involve quantum games and quantum chess, for example, quantum chess tournaments, as Alan described yesterday. You can get hundreds of thousands of people on Twitch, watching and getting excited about that stuff and getting aware of what's happening with these modes of reaching out. And that's it's beautifully diverse group that is plugging in, right? In the same way that Queen's Gambit brought chess back again, right? Roaring back. And now some of these chess grandmasters have some of the largest followings on platforms like Twitch, right? Streaming platforms. And it's really wonderful to see that it's just organically happening. We don't have to even worry as much about it, as long as we get ourselves there, wherever they are, instead of trying to bring them to our side.
So a bunch of, just a few random thoughts on this. One thing, building off this idea of internships and the flexibility in programs, making sure that we're creating flexible programs. Some folks really can't go off to a summer, right? They have family obligations or can't afford. So let's build these programs with a lot of flexibility in them and not so rigid. I think that can help encourage a diversity of folks to engage in this. I think really understanding societal impact of the ultimate work and how that and bringing that forward in the degree, right? It's not just cool about, building some quantum computer, but really how is that going to impact society? I think we need to bring these ideas forth really early on. I think those are just a couple of random ideas to help really make sure that we have an inclusive environment for our students.
Oh, go ahead, Martin.
No, please go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, and I agree with Heather and just taking also a broad approach like others are taking, like Spiro's mentioned, the qubit by qubit. I mean, sort of pursuing multiple threads, but I think also really getting out of our silos where QIS has lived and going to this, think about what we want it to look like and make sure we're involving the people who are actually going to teach this, whether it's at the middle school, high school, whatever it is, make sure we're involving them in the program planning stages, because you know, I'd hate for us to put out a report or start, you know, pushing some thing that's going to really work for wealthy institutions, but is going to just end up looking the same as we've always looked. So I think just trying to step outside and right now have those conversations with a broader set of stakeholders is one thing. Other than that, I think just being agile. I think Heather said this, we have to be agile. There's going to be research that comes out that says some of these approaches won't work, and we'll have to shift our thinking.
Yeah, along the same line, I completely agree that we need to shift our thinking and our approach. And I can only speak by giving you data of that we've gathered in the last 10 years. None of this are my opinions, but are facts that we've observed. The barrier of entry is still there for minorities and different genders. And an example I can give is the IQC high school program, which is targeted grade 11 and 12, is completely free. There's no barrier to entry. It's free. We pay for travel. We were able to secure funding to cover everything. Still, there's a big difference in the application in the statistics of genders. So already there's already a gap between male and female wanting to pursue a career or at least an interest in that, even if we remove the socioeconomic barrier. So there's still problems. So it means that we need to look at it even before that. So once you're talking at university, having program for you guys call it DEI, we call it EDI, the other way around. It's already too late. And similarly, right, we often talk about the leaking pipeline issue, right? So people like getting, some either women or people of color being essentially pushed out because of toxic environment within their study is still an issue. So even in 2021, we're still offering a toxic environment. So we need to work at it from both ends, at the very early on stage and at the end. I don't have the solution, but just looking at it as how do we get more diversity entering college, it's already too late. The gap is already there. So you cannot fill the gap by just, magically, changing the numbers. It has to start way, way earlier than this.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to all of the panelists for this session. I think we need to draw to a close right now to turn things over to Lincoln and to OSA. But thank you so much for your thoughts on a variety of really important issues here. Lincoln? Hi,
it's an awesome panel. Thank you. I learned so much. I just want to mention in response to what Martin said that as I happen to be in APS leadership in this last year, and so one of the major initiatives of APS was to get a bill sponsored by Congress and Senate, actually, to stop the discrimination that's happening against women in particular in the sciences. So there are efforts from APS that are quite significant. You might want to read about those. And there's a strong, large scale recognition that this is a big problem, as shown by bipartisan support from both houses, which is so rare these days on this issue. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that we're going to take a 1-hour lunch. And we come back, please bring your ideas about what should go into the actual curriculum, because these will be some of the things that will go into the paper. We had a great discussion yesterday with about 35 or 40 prospective authors of the paper. If you have more thoughts, please continue to write in the Google Doc. It's incredibly helpful to us, and or bring up things and questions. And feel free to write me directly if you have any thoughts or ideas that you would like to convey. So we'll reconvene in an hour, and I'm going to turn things over to AJ here.
Thanks so much, Lincoln. I appreciate that. And that brings this session to a close. I want to convey on behalf of all of us our sincerest thanks to Theresa Lynn for taking the time to preside over our session this afternoon. Thank you to all of our panel speakers again for sharing your perspective in a very engaging discussion. And lastly, I want to thank all of our attendees that joined in with us to participate. I hope you're all enjoying your time with us. We have plenty more in store for you today. As Lincoln just mentioned, we have a short lunch break, and then our second session starts up at 2:30 Eastern time. So feel free to take a break, grab a snack, and I hope to see you all at the next one. So long, everyone.